The sun was setting over Lahore. It painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. Ali, Sarah, Omar, and Zara stood together on the sidewalk. They looked at the old house at the end of Willow Lane. It was a dark shape against the colorful sky. The house had been empty for as long as anyone could remember. Its windows were like black staring eyes. The paint was peeling off the walls, and the garden was a wild tangle of weeds and thorns. Everyone in the neighborhood had a story about this place. They whispered tales of strange lights and sad noises that came from inside on moonless nights. Omar, who always liked to act brave, broke the silence. "I dare you," he said, his voice a little shaky. "I dare all of you to go inside with me." Sarah shivered, hugging her arms tightly. "I don't know, Omar, it looks scary." Zara, ever the curious one, stepped forward. "I'm not afraid," she declared, though her eyes darted nervously towards the house's dark entrance. Ali just nodded slowly. He didn't want to seem like a coward in front of his friends. The challenge was made. The dare was accepted. They would explore the silent, forgotten house together. They pushed open the rusty iron gate. It groaned loudly like an old man in pain. The sound echoed down the empty street. Their footsteps were quiet on the cracked stone path leading to the front door. The air grew colder the closer they got. It was a strange cold, the kind that sinks into your bones, even on a warm evening. They could smell the scent of old wood and damp earth. The house seemed to breathe this smell out, a long, slow sigh. They stood before the large wooden door, its paint chipped away by years of sun and rain. A heavy brass knocker, shaped like a lion's head, stared at them with empty eyes. Ali reached out a trembling hand and pushed the door. It swung open without a sound, which was stranger than a creak. It was as if the house was inviting them in. They stepped across the threshold, one by one, into the deep darkness inside. The air was thick and heavy, full of dust motes dancing in the faint light from the open doorway. Shadows stretched and twisted in the corners of the vast entry hall. A grand staircase swept upwards into more darkness. The friends huddled together, their adventure suddenly feeling very real and very dangerous. The city's familiar sounds faded away, replaced by the house's heavy silence. Inside, the silence was a living thing. It pressed in on them from all sides. Their own breathing sounded loud in the stillness. A cold wind suddenly swept through the hall. It snaked around their ankles and made the dust on the floor swirl into tiny tornadoes. The front door, which they had left open, slammed shut with a deafening bang. The sound vibrated through the floorboards and up their legs. They were plunged into near-total darkness. Sarah let out a small scream, and Omar fumbled in his pocket for his small flashlight. The thin beam of light cut through the dark, making shadows leap and dance on the walls. They began to walk deeper into the house, staying close together. The flashlight beam moved over furniture covered in white sheets. The sheets looked like sleeping ghosts. The air was filled with a faint whispering sound. It was like the rustling of dry leaves, but there were no leaves inside. "Did you hear that?" Zara whispered, her voice trembling. The others nodded, their eyes wide. The whispers seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. They were soft, sad sounds that they couldn't quite understand. It felt like the house itself was trying to tell them a secret it had kept for a very long time. As they moved into what looked like a large living room, Zara pointed the light at the floor. "Look," she gasped. There, in the thick layer of dust, were footprints, but they were not their own. These prints were small and delicate, like those of a child. They were also barefoot. The strange thing was, the footprints seemed fresh, as if someone had just walked there moments ago. They followed the trail of tiny feet. The prints led them around the shrouded furniture and towards a tall, dark fireplace at the far end of the room. The whispers grew a little louder here, more insistent. Suddenly, a shadowy figure darted across the far corner of the room. It was quick, just a blur of darkness at the edge of their vision. Omar swung the flashlight beam towards the movement, but there was nothing there. Only an old, dusty armchair and a wall with peeling wallpaper. "What was that?" Ali asked, his heart pounding against his ribs. No one had an answer. The cold seemed to seep deeper into the room. They felt as if they were being watched by unseen eyes. The fun dare had turned into a terrifying reality. They were not alone in the house on Willow Lane. A feeling of panic began to set in. "I want to leave," Sarah said, her voice shaking badly. "Let's go back to the door." The others quickly agreed. The mystery of the house was no longer exciting. It was frightening. They turned around, ready to run back to the front hall and escape into the familiar safety of the street. They retraced their steps, moving much faster now. The whispers seemed to follow them, swirling around their heads like a sad, lonely wind. The house felt bigger and darker than before, the hallway stretching on forever. When they reached the front hall, they rushed to the big wooden door. Omar grabbed the large, cold metal handle and pulled. It didn't move. He pulled again, harder this time, with all his strength. The door was stuck fast. It was as if it had been sealed shut with iron. Ali and Sarah joined him, and all three of them pushed and pulled, but it was no use. The door would not open. They were trapped. A cold dread filled the air as they realized their only way out was gone. The house did not want them to leave. They turned around, their backs pressed against the unmoving door. They looked into the darkness of the house. That's when they noticed something was wrong. Someone was missing. "Where's Zara?" Ali asked, his voice cracking with fear. They looked at each other, their faces pale in the dim light. She had been right behind them just a moment ago. They called her name, shouting into the echoing silence. "Zara, Zara, where are you?" Only the soft, sad whispers answered them. She had vanished completely, as if the shadows themselves had swallowed her whole. A new kind of fear gripped them now. It was sharp and terrible. Their friend was gone, lost somewhere in this dark and haunted place. "We have to find her," Omar said, his earlier bravado replaced by a determined resolve. He shone the flashlight beam down the long, dark corridor. They had to go back into the house. They had to face whatever was hiding in the shadows to rescue their friend. With their hearts pounding like drums, they left the sealed door behind and stepped back into the terrifying depths of the house. They had to be brave, not for Adair, but for Zara. They moved slowly, calling out Zara's name in hushed, fearful tones. The flashlight beam cut nervously through the oppressive darkness. They decided to go upstairs, thinking Zara might have wandered up the grand staircase. Each step creaked under their weight, the sound echoing in the silent house. Upstairs, the hallway was lined with closed doors. As they passed one door, they heard a soft sound from inside. It was the sound of quiet crying. Hoping it was Zara, Omar cautiously pushed the door open. It led into a small, dusty bedroom. The room was empty except for a small wooden rocking horse in the center. The crying sound had stopped, but the room felt incredibly sad. On a small bedside table, they found an old, leather-bound diary. Ali picked it up and blew the dust off the cover. He opened it carefully. The pages were filled with neat, looping handwriting. They huddled together, aiming the flashlight at the book. The diary belonged to a young girl named Anaya, who had lived in the house a long time ago. As they read, they learned her sad story. Anaya had been a lonely child who had no friends to play with. Her only companion was the house itself. One day she had become very sick and had passed away in this very room, all alone. Suddenly, they heard a floorboard creak behind them. They spun around to see a faint, shimmering figure standing in the doorway. It was the shape of a young girl with long, dark hair. It was Anaya's ghost. She wasn't scary, just sad. She pointed a translucent finger down the hallway. At the far end, a door they hadn't noticed before was slightly ajar. Light spilled out from the crack. They understood. Anaya wasn't trying to hurt them. She was trying to play. She had taken Zara because she wanted a friend. They hurried to the door and found Zara inside, sitting on the floor, looking dazed but unharmed. With Zara safe, they turned to leave. As they did, the ghost of Anaya smiled a small, sad smile. A gust of wind blew through the hallway, and the front door downstairs creaked open. It was a sign. The house was letting them go. They didn't wait. They ran down the stairs and out the open door. not stopping until they were far down Willow Lane. They stood under a streetlight, catching their breath, the four of them together again. They looked back at the house, now just a dark silhouette against the night sky. They made a promise to each other right then and there. They would never ever go back.